And this month we are going to settle the age-old direct versus indirect debate. I'll give you my blanket answer, but then throughout the mission, you're going to discover your own answer. You can see if you agree with me or see if you disagree. Basically, there's been always this debate in the pickup community: should you open direct or indirect? A direct opener being like, "Hey, you're hot, I like you," or sometimes even more pronounced than that, like "nice shoes, wanna fuck" is the example of the super direct opener. And then the indirect opener is something on the lines of, "Hey, I need your opinion on something. Hey, how do you get to this place?" Which, by the way, don't do it. Even if you're doing indirect, don't ask for directions. Or something situational or conversational, like, "Oh, it's so rainy out here today," and talking about something that is not a sexual topic, not a man to woman topic in any way at the start. Now, a lot of people have their preferences on this. Some guys say that if you go direct, you give your power away, right? It's too unnatural, it's too obvious, it's too contrived. She's making a decision about you on just a glance without knowing you, and that's fair and accurate. Other guys say if you go indirect, that you never show intent, you have a half-hour conversation to nowhere, and you never make it man to woman. You're hiding your intentions. You're trying to be sneaky, and that agenda will be perceived. There's a lot of reasons why people will say that indirect is bad. And here's what I'm going to say: neither one is inherently bad. Neither one is inherently good. There is a good way to do direct, and there's a good way to do indirect. And if you do bad indirect, it will suck. If you do bad direct, it will suck. If you do good direct, it will work a high percentage of the time. If you do good indirect, it will work a high percentage of the time. What I'm going to have you do in this mission is actually do both. Or specifically, if you're very, very into doing one particular, like if you're very a go direct guy, I'm actually for this mission going to have you go indirect. If you're a very go indirect guy for this mission, I'm going to have you go direct. If you either don't have a set habit or are fairly new to the game, what I'd like you to do is do a little bit of both. But we're going to explore the different styles. Before we get into that, I'm going to give you some tips on how to do each style correctly. Okay? So let's first talk about the direct style, the "hey, I like you" style. Okay. There is a right and a wrong way to do "hey, I like you." First of all, if you're too over the top or too blatant, what's going to happen is you're going to narrow the range of girls that will respond to you. So for example, something like "nice shoes, wanna fuck," or like, "Hey, somebody's going to give me a blowjob tonight and I think it's you." Like that kind of opener. That kind of opener can actually work, but what will happen is you'll get a massive amount of rejection and then a few girls that will like it. The good thing is the few girls that do like it will be the girls that are very down. So it's a natural screening mechanism. You're screening out a lot of girls, and then you'll end up with the girls that are down. But you're probably screening out too many girls, to be fair. If you're super hyper direct or like over the top or cheesy, then you're going to screen out more girls than you probably want to. So it's better to be something a little more sort of in between in caliber, like, "Hey, you intrigue me, I want to meet you," or "Hey, I thought you were cute, I wanted to meet you." So you're giving a genuine compliment. You're showing clear man to woman interest, but you're not necessarily just like being like, "let's fuck now," right? Because "let's fuck now" does put them to a very big decision with not a lot of information. So that's pretty clear. The second thing is you don't want your compliment to be giving all your power away. So yes, you should go, when you go direct, show some interest, let the girl know that she likes you. If you go and approach her, she kind of knows already probably that you like her, so you're not exactly putting new information on the table. But the thing is to not completely give her everything. Don't just give her like, "Here are my balls on a platter. I'll do anything for you no matter what. You don't have to win me at all." That's not effective. You still need to qualify. You still need to have a position of selectivity as a man and a position of high value. So what I really suggest you do here is qualify the girl early. So one particular example would be something like, "Hey, you're adorable. I wanted to meet you. Who are you?" Right? And putting that decision out there, putting, first of all, that tonality that's a little bit demanding, and secondly, a conversational piece that's a little bit demanding, so that you make it an equal conversation sooner rather than later, as opposed to, "Oh, goddess, you're on a pedestal. I love you. Will you please deign to speak to me?" That's the wrong way to go direct, all right? That's not going direct. That's going pathetic, all right? So you want to go direct, but go direct as a strong man. The other thing that can be useful in going direct is if you notice that it's a little too strong, you can soften it in certain ways. You can give what we call the false timing. I have to get out of here in a second, but I thought you were so cute, etc. So that makes it a little bit less of an imposition on the girl and a little bit less of something's like, "Oh shit, this guy's in my face, I don't know him." It can ease her into the conversation a little bit more. So again, it's a way of softening that directness. Now the great thing about going direct is that it very much enhances your ability to have a man-to-woman conversation. I was going to say it forces you to have a man-to-woman conversation, and it really should force you to, but I've seen guys somehow get out of it still. They'll go and they'll open direct and be like, "Hey, you're really cute. So anyway, about that weather, right? Don't do that either. Just the fact that you open direct doesn't make the whole set direct. And similarly, when we talk about indirect, just the fact that you open indirect does not dictate that the entire set is indirect, okay? But the advantage of the direct opener is that once you're in the set, you have that man-to-woman vibe. So the last thing you want to do is risk the man-to-woman vibe and risk like an instant rejection by going direct, and then immediately lose all the benefit by then making the set itself hyper indirect. Okay, so don't do that. All right, so those are some tips for if you do want to go with the direct opener. If you want to go with the indirect opener, a few tips on that. Number one is there's kind of two types of indirect openers. There's the canned indirect opener and the impromptu indirect opener. Canned indirect opener would be something like the old school opinion opener, or like having a story prepared and going in and just spitting out the story. The impromptu would be going in and just like going with whatever you notice at that moment. In my experience, the impromptu tends to be better if it's actually like, you know, coming from something you really noticed. Now, if you're trying to be impromptu, like you're trying a little too hard to be situational, trying a little too hard to be impromptu, and it's not actually on your mind, that's almost like bad canned anyway, and you don't want to do that. But if you happen to have a specific observation that's really on your mind or that you really notice at the moment of the open, that's usually your best open, period. Also, that's your best open, even going back to the direct style. If you have like a specific compliment to her for your directness that just hit you in that moment, that's usually the best way to go. All right, so if it really comes to you, if it's just like on your mind, just say it, just spit it out and don't censor yourself. So that's going to be the best way to go. The advantage, though, of doing the canned indirect is that you have something to say after the opener, and it forces you, because you have a story, it forces you to keep talking, it forces you to carry the conversation. So you're not going to end up in that awkward situation where you're like, I've opened, now what? Right? So that's the benefit of having something canned, is that will work for you. My actual suggestion is go in and have something, or have a few things potentially canned in case you need them, but then go and be impromptu if possible. And within that being impromptu, understand that you're going to need to carry the burden. You're going to need to talk for a few minutes at the start of the conversation, or not necessarily you need to have to, but you need to be willing to and able to if necessary. So having that behind you and having that willingness, more important than the material is the willingness to continue talking behind your open is very, very critical, okay? Now what you want to avoid in general, like strategically with the indirect opener, is again staying too indirect. All right, a lot of guys when they open indirect, they have what I call the half-hour conversation in nowhere, which is they have this conversation, I watch it from a distance and it looks decent. It looks like the girl's engaging, they're engaging, there's conversation occurring. And then what will happen is if a student does this, they'll come back to me afterwards and I'll be like, oh, look good, what happened? I'll be like, oh, she wasn't really into it. I'm like, you talked to her for 20 minutes. And I'll be like, she wasn't really into it. I'm like, what? And then I'll go listen to his next set, and what I'll hear is 20 minutes in, he's still talking about whatever opinion he asked the girl, or he's still talking about the weather or sports or something like that. Obviously, if you don't bridge that gap between, platonic conversation and man to woman, it's never going to work. So don't stay so indirect that there's just no set going on, right? There's a difference between like vapid conversation and actually, hitting on a girl and showing some intent. Either way, whether you go direct or indirect, neither one is an excuse to like not show intent at some point, right? At some point, you definitely still have to show intent. You can show your intent in more of an aloof way with the indirect open, to be like, oh, you know what, I'm not sure if I like you, and then kind of let her win. So that's the benefit there, and that's what can make an indirect opener good in some tricky group situations where you might not be welcome to go as direct at the start. So that's a particular instance where indirect can be good. But so understand whether you go direct or indirect, you are going to have to show intent. Also understand whether you go direct or indirect. Specifically, a lot of times if you go direct, you don't want to be super cheesy and over the top. You don't want to be so like unbelievably sexual that you screen out too many girls. All right, that's really where it breaks down the difference between direct and indirect. The philosophy of going direct is I'm going to put something on the table and girls are going to like it or dislike it to a certain extent, but the sets that are on will be really on, so I won't waste time and I'll have I'll spend my time in good solid sets. The premise of indirect is I don't want to screen out too many girls at the start. I'd rather a lot of girls accept me at the start, and then I will weed them out or get weeded out by them over time. And so you would expect to open a higher percentage of sets with indirect, but you would expect them to open less strongly and less well and them to take longer to develop. Whereas when you open direct, you would expect to open fewer number of sets, like very positively, but the ones that are positive will be even more positive and will be moving in a direction that may work better for you. In any case, I want you to have proficiency with both, because the skills that you're going to learn from direct will help you even if you normally go indirect, and there's skills you might not learn as quickly in that context. And similarly, the skills of going indirect and learning to have a conversation where you don't lean on intent as a crutch, that's a big one, right? When a lot of guys, they go direct and say, hey, I like you, and then the whole conversation becomes about the fact that they like the girl, and that's effective, but what happens if you're in a social setting where you can't do that? Or what happens if you get a girl who seems to like your conversation but isn't receptive to the sexual advances? You're going to turn her off, whereas you could have maybe gotten somewhere with her by taking more of an indirect approach. All right, so indirect guys tend to lean on conversation as an excuse not to get direct. Direct guys tend to use directness as an excuse not to actually learn conversational skills. So I want you to learn both. I want you to be good at both. So the mission is, for one night, if you go very direct, you are only allowed indirect opens for that night. And I would ideally say even go like, don't be the guy that goes indirect and then super direct afterwards. Like, hey, I need your opinion. Actually, you know what? You're hot. Because that's violating the principle. So it's not just the open. It's really the open in like first 20 seconds of the interaction, all right? Is indirect if you normally go direct. If you normally go indirect, I want you to force yourself to just balls up and put it out there and just go direct. Again, if you don't have a lot of history with either one, then you have two choices. One is do a night of both, which is what I'd suggest. It's, you know, more field time, which is always a good thing, and also give you more to report on and more for me to give feedback to you on. Or if you'd like, split the night in two and do half direct and half indirect. The other reason why it's good to do a full night of both, though, is a lot of times if you don't have experience and you go half and half, there's going to be a momentum factor, and you may do better with whatever type of open you use in the second half of the night because of momentum. And that might lead you to believe that's the better opener type for you when that could in fact be false. So be careful of that selectivity bias if you do go that route. But I want you guys to get practice with a direct and indirect. So go out, do one night of your non-favorite style, or if you like, one night of each. Report back to me and I will give you feedback, and we'll go from there. Thanks. See you next time.